happened in this trial. She now has been convicted.
Well, she is convicted and is awaiting sentencing. The maximum sentence that she faces is a 2 to 7 year term in state prison. It is conceivable that the judge could impose probation as well. But we are really concerned about an appeal in this case. The nature of the trial was such that the judge excluded some substantial evidence that was favorable to Cecily in ruling, for example, that several of our character witnesses were cumulative, that we couldn't present different perspectives from Occupy Wall Street and their vision of who Cecily was. The judge prohibited us from questioning the police officer who was assaulted about the lightness of the injury, because later that night, a couple hours after he was given the black eye that led to this conviction, he was banging some Occupy Wall Street protesters' heads on the stairs of a bus, a guy who was in handcuffs. The judge wouldn't let us ask about that. So on balance, you know, the fact that this prosecution went forward is really what's of concern. This officer got a black eye, a bit of a mouse, and was back on duty a week later, no particular difficulty. Cecily, regardless of what you think about whether she slugged the cop or not, was severely beaten and was put into a seizure, or what appeared to be a seizure, with some serious physical injuries and a total lack of memory about what happened to her. She was then dragged to a hospital where she was told that she was going to be released. So she said, all right, I want to go see my own doctor. And then subsequently, she was told, you're being charged with assaulting this police officer. She was completely shocked. She had absolutely no idea what she had been arrested for and what she had done or what she had been accused of doing. So the claim that Cecily somehow intentionally assaulted the police officer was a bit ridiculous. This is a young woman who is known as a nonviolent activist. In fact, on this particular night, she wasn't even out protesting. She was out celebrating St. Patrick's Day and only wound up in Zuccotti Park to meet somebody so they could continue going drinking at the Irish pubs that are down by the Wall Street area. She was caught up in the police department's manufactured need to sweep Zuccotti Park clear on the 6-month anniversary of the occupation of the park. They made up a notion that somehow or other the park had to be cleaned at midnight. Therefore, everybody who had gathered peacefully and in a rather festive and joyful occasion to celebrate the anniversary had to be cleared out. Cecily was among those who were cleared out. What is absurd, and which I have difficulty understanding how the jury could reject it, is that when you look at the video, you see Cecily in a bright green dress. The police officer testified that before she swung her elbow, she said, film this, please," as if she's advertising in a bright green dress that, hey, I'm going to commit a crime, why don't you just film it so everybody can spot me?
Let's turn to the footage that was presented in court. Here you can barely make out Cecily McMillan and a police officer in the crowd. Prosecutors claim the footage shows, as you said, McMillan elbowing police officer Grantley Bovell in the face. Explain what it is that we are seeing here.
Well, what you're seeing from the prosecution's point of view is somebody who, for absolutely no reason whatsoever, just out of the blue, slugged a cop. Right? Makes absolutely no sense given who the person is. When you slow down the video and you look at it frame by frame, you see what appears to be the officer's arm across Cecily's torso. And it is what her recollection of the event is that arm came up and grabbed her breast. And she just reacted. Her elbow went up and hit the police officer in the eye. It's an accident. It was not an intentional effort to prevent the cop from doing his job. And what his job was escorting Cecily out of the park. It is difficult to believe that Cyrus Vance, who is the elected district attorney of this county, could look at the injuries that Cecily got, her what is probably going to be a lifelong course of post-traumatic stress disorder, that she's suffering from, and this little black eye that the cop got. Not that he deserved a black eye, but if you grab somebody's breast, then you have to think that something's going to happen.
You had photographs of bruises all over her body when she came on our show. She was displaying some of them. But the prosecution cast doubt on all this, and one of their claims was that she never told medical officials of her injuries. How did they work to undermine her claims of being injured? That is really one of the more difficult things to understand. April was Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the District Attorney's Office. However, the DA argued to the jury that because Cecily did not, from the very first hospital she went to, Beekman Downtown, or the second hospital, Bellevue, they argued that because she didn't all of a sudden make an immediate outcry that her breast had been groped by a police officer, therefore, it didn't happen. Now, that's really a sexist, anti-woman position, and that they were able to get away with it when, with the assistant district attorney being a woman, and in Sexual Awareness Week in the DA's office to suggest that because of a lack of an outcry that somebody had groped your breast, therefore it didn't happen. That's really ancient history and never should have been allowed.
Lucy Parks, you're a friend of Cecily, though you weren't there that night. What are you calling for now? She's been convicted. She, to the surprise of many, was actually taken off to Rikers, and I'd like to ask about that as well, denied bail, and in 2 weeks the sentence will be determined.
Well, Cecily has a support team, and we're still figuring out what our next step is going to be, because the verdict came very much like a punch in the gut, and especially the fact that she did get sent straight to Rikers. But, I mean, there was a very organic rally and march that happened last night at Zuccotti Park. We'll also be putting together petitions, call-in days, all that sort of stuff, and also trying to bring together the communities of ex-OWS activists and anyone who feels strongly about this trial to try and heal and then try and move forward, and also broaden the conversation about the justice system to talk about more people than just Cecily, because she's got it pretty bad, but there are people who have been hurt worse by the justice system even.
The Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance, he's obtained indictments against 7 Occupy activists between 2011 and 2012 on charges of assaulting police officers. 2 pleaded guilty, 1 was acquitted, and 3 were allowed to plead guilty on misdemeanors. Do you think that with this prosecution and with this verdict, there was a political message being sent to activists?
I most definitely do. To me, the political message is that dissent isn't really legal anymore. I mean, you can go to a protest, not even a protest, just be there, and get sexually assaulted, accidentally hit a cop, and wind up in prison for 2 to 7 years. So that's really scary. And I also think that part of why this case was prosecuted so hard was because the NYPD and the criminal justice system in New York wanted to send a message and put its bookend on Occupy, saying with the guilty verdict that they've won.
Marty Stoller, she could have made a plea deal.
Well, the only plea deal that was offered was for her to plead guilty to a felony.
Would she have gone to jail in that case?
She would have been offered probation as part of the plea. She could have pled guilty to a felony. She could have gotten probation.
She knew she faced 7 years in jail,
and
but
she knew she faced 7 years in jail, and she chose because she's an innocent woman. And it's unfortunate that sometimes an innocent person gets convicted in the criminal courts. That's what we have appellate courts for. And we will continue the fight to try to get this conviction reversed. It is pretty outrageous that this puts the bookend on Occupy Wall Street. The statistics that you read before about how many people were arrested for assault and how many pleaded guilty are incorrect. Cecily is the only felony conviction after trial for assaulting a police officer. Nobody else was convicted. And over 90% of the roughly 3,000 arrests that took place during the time when Occupy Wall Street was active were dismissed. So why go after Cecily with such a heavy hand? The only explanation that I've ever been able to figure out is that it's an effort to protect the city of New York from a substantial monetary penalty for the conduct and for the treatment that she received in getting beat up, neglected, and finally hospitalized, and for the lifelong effects that she's going to have from how she was brutalized on the night that she was arrested.